welcome back to another episode of Tech Pro Unicorn. Today we are in our core, right? We like to talk about software systems and financial systems and, servicing customers with that. And my guest today, Anthony Nitsos, he provides proven scaling strategies for SaaS, and let me define SaaS, that's software as a service, CEOs and founders with best-in-class finance and stakeholder ecosystems that always produce the right numbers, save cash, protect assets, and free CEOs and founders to focus on what matters most, growth. Anthony brings a unique mix of medical school training, which I want to ask about, Six Sigma Black Belt process expertise, and the financial skills of a CFO with 2 unicorn exits and numerous other startups to his credit to provide the world's most sought-after resource for B2B software as a service company, financial strategy, and operations. So, Anthony, thank you for taking the time and joining us here on the podcast to talk about SaaS.
Thank you. I love to talk about SaaS.
It's, I always say our founders are, they're founders and that sounds great, but they're also chief bottle washers and they get to do everything, right? They're trying to set up a company and hire people and get rounds of funding so that their company stays alive. And then they're like, oh yeah, and I guess we need software systems to keep track of our finances and manage our people and such. And so you've kind of plugged right into that chaos here with what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about what SaaS Gurus is and how you're helping these folks.
So what we do is we take the Frankenstein's monster that's usually what the back office and finance and sales ops and a lot of the ops pieces of companies look like when we first come in, and we fix it. And we fix it in a way that's, streamlined, so it's easy. I like to brag we're the laziest CFOs in the market. We want all of our numbers coming to us. We don't want to be chasing anything. That's the thing is that a lot of what my experience of what the fractional, and we're fractional CFOs, okay, just, so we're clear, this is fractional, right? We're not talking about full-time CFOs, although you're just talking about a degree of quantity, not necessarily quality. But what a fractional CFO does when we come in, especially these smaller startups, younger, earlier stage startups, you're right. Somebody went out and said, hey, I'm a founder. I need an accounting system. Great. Okay, let's go get QuickBooks or Xero. Okay. We need a payroll system. All right, let's go get, Trax or Gusto or something. Okay, that's fine. Hey, we need a budgeting tool. So we got to, these pesky forecasts that we have to put in front of, investors. I wish they'd just leave me alone and somebody else would do this. Here, I'll download this one from MIT or whatever it is and make it work. We need a CRM. Hey, somebody go grab HubSpot, right? And so what you end up with is a tech pile, right? You got all these tech pieces, right? Each one trying to do certain part of the company, support it, but they don't talk to each other. They weren't purchased with any plan. They're not integrated in any manner. They're not harmonized in any manner. So we come in and, we have silos here and there and everywhere else, right? And this is a prime example, very recent. We came in, it's like, this is a company that does, has a significant implementation lift on their software. So I say, hey, we've got, this project management thing. Great. That's great. How do you track time? Oh, that's over here in this piece of software. I said, oh, that's great. How do you track your CRM? Oh, those quotes are over here. I said, uh-huh. I said, and what about accounting? Yeah, well, that's QuickBooks over here. I said, I see. I said, so you have 4 different systems with the same customer number, same customer information in it, right? Yeah. I said, so how are you doing that? Oh, we enter it all 4 times. And I'm like, This is a prime example of tech pile, right? You should have a unified system where there's, I go back to the efficiency. You wanted to ask about medical school. Well, in medical school, and I'll tell you that whole story if you really want, what you're trained to do, what we were trained to do is not just treat symptoms, contrary to popular belief that, doctors are just, pill prescribers for big pharma. No, the good ones are looking for what's really wrong with you. It's the root cause and trying to cure that or treat it. Right. So when we go into an engagement, we're looking for the root cause. Like, what's really causing this? Well, you have 15 data entry points and the systems don't talk to each other. And oh, by the way, this is all set up by a tax CPA. Well, if you're a tax CPA, I'm sorry, I'm not going to offend you, but you put together financial statements in a way that helps you file the tax returns. That's great. Whereas my Scots friends would say, that's great. But it doesn't do you any good as a CEO when your payroll is all in one line item. You can't tell what your gross margin is. You can't tell what your cost to acquire customers are because you don't know what your sales and marketing spend is. Some poor schmuck has to go back and tease out all your R&D spend so you can claim the proper tax credit. On and on and on it goes, right? So we're looking for ways to say, okay, there's a way to harmonize this. There's a tech stack that works. There's a proper way to set it up. And you can do all this. We do it. And when you're done, you have a system that'll scale from, add a zero to whatever you're doing. It'll scale. And you can plug and play. If you started off with QuickBooks and you want to go to NetSuite, you can do that. If you want to start off with spreadsheets for tracking your SaaS and you want to go to SaaS Optics later, you can do that. Or what I would do is just say, go to SaaS Optics first and skip the rigmarole. And that's really the background. So that's tactical operational stuff, right? We need those numbers. We need the numbers put together in a way that's consistent with SaaS. And we go back for our touchstones on Pacific Crest. They were the original bank back in Silicon Valley days, way back, I think in the dawn of Silicon Valley time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were later acquired by KeyBank Capital Markets. Well, they do these surveys and they were constantly thought leaders in terms of, if you're a SaaS company, here's how your financial statements should be put together. And then as these companies go public, the SEC steps in and says, yeah, this is how we want you to put and provides guidance, right? So that's what we follow. We follow those standards and say, look, there is a right way to put this together. And when you're done, you as a CFO or a CEO or a COO or whoever who has a C-level suite or executive has the information that they actually need to run the company and projection. Because in the end, that whole finance and sales ops and all that ecosystem isn't worth a hill of beans if you can't use it to actually manage and predict where your cash is going, bluntly, right? If you're a tech startup, if you're a SaaS company, there are two metrics that you need to have in front of you at all times: your ARR growth, your sales growth, and your cash. Because one tells you how much you're worth, and the other one tells you how much time you have left before you need to go raise money. That's what we do.
I love it. We were sharing before Anthony and I started. We implement these larger ERPs, but ultimately we're trying to do the same thing, right? Whether that tech stack is on a huge ERP like an Oracle or an SAP or Infor, or startups usually don't go out and buy those huge systems, right? They're more focused on their core business. But ultimately, we're trying to reduce what we call technical debt, right? All these systems, we're trying to consolidate that so that leadership has a better vision of what is actually happening within their organization, especially as it scales and grows. And I really love you pointing out the example of the cost of sales, right? It just becomes a line item in a general ledger, and people are like, "Oh, that's a big number." Well, is it? In relation to what? And you just can't dive into it, and you can't slice it and dice it and really get information. And then you get, to your point, you get some business analyst or accounting intern, that's got to go pull it all out. And what if it was all just there?
Exactly. And what it does is, I used to do ERP implementations. I made my living as one of the key stops on my journey was an entire time when I was working on ERP systems. This was right around the Y2K crisis, where before, so dial back the Wayback Machine here. And for those of you who were born in the 21st century, you might, want to put some music on while us oldsters go back in time. But you go back to the early late 90s, right? And everybody who had any sophisticated, computer system to run their business was starting to panic because they thought all of this code that had, 2-year digits, once everything switched over to the year 2000 from like 1999, it wasn't going to be like, Prince said, there was not going to be parting, in 1999, 2000, everybody's going to crash, right? So everybody's panicking. Oh my God, we got to redo our code. One of the big solutions was to go out and buy SAP or Bon or JD Edwards or MFG Pro or whatever they were back then, but the ERP systems back then. I was in Michigan, so that's where I was heavily into the manufacturing ERP at the time. But that really showed that a lot of the problems that we encountered were all from legacy systems having been siloed, cobbled together, not harmonized. And now you have to figure out and sort out to say, okay, who has the customer list? Basic question, right? Who has the customer list? Well, accounting has it. No, accounting doesn't have it. Sales has it. No, sales doesn't have it. Customer support has it. And it's like, okay, who's going to get into the urinary Olympics here to figure out who's actually got the list? And on it goes. So that was part of, why when I come in now with a finance hat on and a CFO hat, I never forget my original training in ERP and process reengineering to say, look, you're wasting money. And more important, you're wasting your time. Because an executive leadership team needs to have the numbers come to them so they can make decisions, not chasing numbers and crunching them and then hoping that somebody got it right. That's not science. That's not business. That's, voodoo.
We, I like to, anytime a customer challenges me, and I love to be challenged and get in great discussions, but I'll go in and say, how many employees do you have? And they'll be like, oh, we have 5,123. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go ask finance. Finance, how many employees? Oh, we have 5,226. HR, how many? Oh, we have this, and everybody has a different number. And I'm like, did you just suddenly terminate or hire people? Or, well, no, and you can't even get a discussion going on who has what we call in the IT world the master data, right?
Yes.
Where does that data live and who owns it and how is it governed and controlled? You touched a little bit on process. I can only imagine, right, in these startup worlds where companies are growing rapidly, hopefully, right? Hopefully they have a great product and a great offering and their company is getting funded and they're scaling. That processes just become chaos, right? As you're trying to hire people and just grow and just keep up. And talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing, when you go in from a process perspective as well as the software stuff.
It's exactly that. And if you don't get on this early, you end up having to throw bodies at things in order to get stuff to work. And that sucks up that VC capital or the PE capital or whatever capital it is. And that's really what this comes down to. Like I said, sales and cash. Okay, part of that cash is cash management. And part of cash management's not, you wasting it on non-value added activities. Go back to NVA. So a lot of NVA in the back office sources from, I think you called it tech debt, sources from all this redundancy, right? Where you have to do, multiples. So I've been with two companies now where we added a zero to revenue in 3 years. One was 5 to 50 million. The other one was 13 to 130 million. And in the first case, the main miss was in staffing. It wasn't in proper org planning. It wasn't looking and say, look, you're going to, 10x your business. You have contracts on the books, right? You have bookings that this stuff is coming. Okay. So you're planning. They did a great job of planning the machines. They did a great job of, we did a great job in planning the back office, in terms of all the systems that we needed because I had full control over that stuff. And I, was very clear on what I wanted to accomplish. So we automated the living daylights out of things. I had 3 staff with me when we started at 5 million. I had the same 3 staff at me when we were running at 50 million, and we were doing the same amount of, processing of financial statements, et cetera, all because we automated. Back then, state of the art was barcode scanning. So everything was barcode scanned, and all of our labor data and all of our materials data and everything was flowing into a system in an automated way. Fast forward to the company that grew from 13 million to 130 million. Software this time, not manufacturing. And I think that's the difference. In manufacturing, you are taught very early, you will be as efficient as possible with every cent that you have, or they won't find your body. Okay. It's like, just don't bother. Okay. Because margin in the automotive industry, this is the thing about growing up in Michigan, only the strong survive, right? We've been through so many oil crises and whatnot. The companies that figured out to be the most efficient, which were the Japanese, we're the ones that came out on top. And I happen to work for a Japanese company. So that's where I get this, idea from. Now I fast forward and I come into software, 25% G&A spend. I'm like, how? Can you get away with that? Oh, well, we have, our C round was $35 million. I'm like, oh, so it means you just pee it away? I mean, you just waste it. Now, that may work when you have $100 million sitting in your bank account or $50 million sitting in your bank account. But when you have 3 or 5 and you have to figure out how to make that go for 18 months, and oh, by the way, we need to triple revenue while we're doing that, you have to do this with a plan. You have to be forethoughtful, Promethean in your thinking in terms of, okay, what's, down to what customer support management software are we going to use in order to deliver that many contracts? You want to add 40 contracts in the next, 12 months. Okay, that's great. Right now you're adding about 5 or 10 contracts in 12 months. You now want to 8x that. Do you think your systems are going to work? The earlier you can get on these things, the better. I like to use the analogy of, everybody knows about the great big asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, right? 66 million years ago, rock comes down in Yucatan, bye-bye dinosaurs. Now my kids have lots of toys to play with, right? But if you're a company and let's say there's something headed your way that could potentially wipe you out, like choking on your own systems because you can't get anything done, would you rather see that happening a long distance off and make a change, a small course correction, or do you want it on top of you? In other words, do you want to find that asteroid when it's at the orbit of Pluto or the orbit of the moon? Because one of them you could do something about, the other one you're just going to bend over and kiss your you-know-what bye-bye.
So many times our customers, right, come and they're like, we need systems, and the system is going to fix everything. And sometimes I'm like, let me deliver the news and call your baby ugly, and I hope you appreciate that and don't, hate them, kill the messenger. But sometimes you just have bad process that has nothing to do with the system. Sometimes you're just doing things stupidly. Yeah. And you need somebody to call that out and go, why are you doing this? Like, what is the end result you're trying to get to? Why would you do all of this to get to that? And that's hard because a lot of the times the people who you're telling that to are the people who created said dumb process, and they are a little resistant to hearing that. But they look to software. Well, the software will solve this.
Okay. I go back to my original training. Every business function has 3 common characteristics: the process, the tools or technology that you use to execute the process, and the people that you're going to have operate the tools and run the process. So people, processes, tools, I call it tools or technology, right? When you take a look at process reengineering, which one do you go after first? And I can tell you, it's not the people. It's not even the technology. You nailed it. It's the process. Now, the process and technology interrelate. They interoperate because certain processes can be done with this technology and can't be done with this technology, right? So there's a back and forth there. But the way Demings did it, and if you've not come across the name Edward Demings before, then this is the guy who basically invented Japan Inc. ability to have quality products the way they did. He was an American. You know the story of Edward Demings? It's really kind of fun.
Briefly, yeah, but I think it's worth sharing.
He was among other things, he was a statistician, and he's to this day the statistical methods that we use for the census were based entirely on his work back in the very early 20th century. Well, he had a friend. His friend's name was Douglas MacArthur. You might remember General MacArthur from the "I Shall Return" kind of thing that Schwarzenegger later ripped off and said, "I'll be back." So. When MacArthur stepped foot in Japan at the end of World War II and realized that he had a bombed out shell of everything, he brought his friend Edward Demings across the waves to say, I want you to help them get their manufacturing base back up because we've got these Russians over here, the Soviets over here. We've got, basically we need to get this country back up and running quickly. He did it. And he did it in a way where they took a look at and said, there are 3 things: people, processes, and tools. You solve the process first. You figure out what tools you need to enact that process. So you find the most efficient way of doing it first from a process. You design the ideal process first. Then you find out what tools you can use to make that happen. And you idiot-proof them. You make it so that the human cannot create an error, and you address the people last. So you notice in that hierarchy, technology came second, because technology in and of itself doesn't solve a thing. If it's, if I'm bringing in Salesforce to a company that just started with 2 employees, do you think I did a little bit of overkill there on my CRM? Probably. So I mean, that's maybe a silly example, but it's like, that's the wrong, it's not, software does not solve all problems. It has to start with process. And ultimately what I found, and this as well as I do, I'm sure, is that these ERP implementations are a people implementation first, middle, and last. Because if somebody is holding on to their dearly held process that they created, that their job also probably happens to depend on, and you come in and tell them that their baby's ugly, of course they're going to resist you, because they don't want to lose their job. They don't want to be embarrassed because they created something that's no good. And B, they don't want to lose their job because once that process is automated out of existence, they're not going to have anything to do. That's the fear. That's what you're working with. I dealt with time and time again in the ERP implementations is, we're going to have to change this. And it's going to go faster, and it's going to be better. And these 3, and I'm not saying it out loud, and these 3 accountants over here who are doing all this manual stuff aren't going to need to do that. Now, a smart company is going to find a role for those people, because if they're good workers and they've got the right attitude and they're good culture fit and whatnot, then you want to keep those resources because they know the systems already. They know the company already. You just need to match them up to the new role. And that, that's a political game. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That takes people skills. It takes, the ability to be, unoffensive when you're coming in and telling them that, this is the stupidest process I've ever seen. I can't believe you guys got this far as you did. You can't say that out loud. Okay, it's not going to work. You may think that all you want, and you may tell your other ERP buddies in the bar later, man, I can't believe how bad that, but you can't say that to the client. Okay. You have to find a way to, put that in a way that makes, everybody feel good.
I love it. Yeah, we do a lot of robotic process automation. And, it's just kind of funny because as soon as we come and we say robotic process automation, word spreads and everyone's like, we're going to lose our jobs.
And it's a legitimate fear.
It is.
It's a legitimate fear.
There's a great website, Will Robots Take My Job, I think is the name of the website. And the number 1 job that shows up there for automation is accountants.
Yes.
Right? Because if you think about accountants, you don't creatively come up with stuff, right? You usually take inputs and then you're just moving them into some other, system or form, right? The results of this, you key a GL entry that shows up on a financial statement and such. So all that can be automated, but then go do more valuable stuff, right? Because if you get off on doing GL entries, you're sick. Right? Go add more. Add more value to the organization because you're super smart, or you wouldn't be in the position you're in. Right? Go do value-added stuff for that company and help them grow.
Exactly. Amen. And this is what we come in and do on a smaller scale, not on, the ERP is the larger scale stuff, but I love working with the tech startups. I love working with the VC backed world. It's, it's an exciting, I get to see all sorts of cutting edge technology, but it all comes back to, the training that I had and the history, which is like, look, there's an easy way to do this. I mean, there are so many you're right. There are a lot of software solutions out there to help you automate everything from A to Z in not just in finance ops, but in sales ops and customer ops and HR ops, anything where, there is data, right? And there are data everywhere, right? Our entire world is built on massive amounts of data. Data creation is no different than making a widget on an assembly line. It all follows the same principles for quality control. Whoever creates the data is the one in the best position to control its initial quality. It's no different than a manufacturing process. The guy who's on the front line creating the widget's the best one to make sure that it's done right. You want to make sure it's done right first, not somebody later having to go check it. That's a detective control to make sure that you did it right. You want a process designed so that it produces only good parts so that you don't have to waste any money on detection. Accounting is rife with the attitude that I have to have checklists for everything. Right? Okay. Well, The problem with checklists is that whatever has happened has already happened. And so if you're checking it, it means that you're going to find something that was done wrong and fix it. Okay, so now I've gone from let's prevent the error from happening in the first place to let's find it and fix it. When you take a look at the cost of preventing an error versus the cost of detecting an error versus the cost of correcting an error, it's a parabolic function. It goes from x to x squared to x3. And that's a pretty strong truism in manufacturing, because if you created a defect and it got past your quality control and out into the world, let's say you're supplying fuel lines to GM, and GM finds out that at one fuel line in this last batch bursts under a pressure test, right? So they randomly, or it doesn't fit right. All of a sudden, they're going to throw all of your parts into quarantine. They're going to make you bring people in to inspect every single one. And oh, by the way, if you shut my line down, I'm going to send you a bill for every hour that my line is down. And if you want to know how much a GM line costs per hour, let me tell you, that can put a company out of business.
Yep.
So that's why creating preventive controls was such a big deal, especially with the Japanese companies, that they don't want anything to go out there. Sony's Morita put it best once when he was asking his team. He said, if we have 6 Sigma quality and only 3 parts per million or 3 VCRs per million are wrong, he said, is that good? And everyone's like, yeah, that's good. He said, what about the 3 people that got the bad VCRs? To them, it's 100% failure. So this is in the world of computers, in the world of manufacturing, hitting 6 Sigma, 6 Sigmas, which is 3 out of a million parts per 3 parts per million bad versus 999, right? With computers, you can make that essentially infinite. Because once you set things up in a computer system, right now, as accurate as our transistors are, as accurate as our semiconductors are, the failure rate is like what, 1 in some pentillion, that a quantum ray comes in and hits a circuit the wrong way. So you can create perfect data. You can create perfect quality. You just need to adhere to certain, principles, basic principles, which is single point of data entry. Whoever is doing the data entry, it should be automated if at all possible, so a human doesn't have to do it. All data entry goes in one point and is propagated throughout the system and is added to as needed, not recreated. You design controls that prevent errors from occurring, not ones that detect it. That's a really big lift for accounting teams to get past, to say, look, you need to get away from your checklists and figure out how to put this in a way that's automated, that no human being ever touches it, so that it's accurate from the get-go. And on down the list. It may sound like big company stuff, but when you implement this in a company that has, 5 people, 10 people, 30 people, all of a sudden their lives get easier and they're happier because they have the information they need. They're not scrambling they're not scratching their head saying, gee, is that the right number? As you said, you had some intern pull that out. How would I know he did it right? Mm-hmm. Right. And then what you start to see is morale improves. When morale improves, productivity improves. I'm going to go back to my medical training. Happy workers are better workers. They don't get sick. They enjoy what they do. They're engaged. They look for ways to make it better. That's the environment that you want. Well, it's hard to get to that environment when you're constantly distracted by, dreck in your systems that produce information that's useless to you or doesn't produce the information that you need in a timely manner.
I love everything you just said, right? It's easier to me to get it right at the beginning, right? To really think it through when you're small, so that as you scale, you're scaling from a better place, right? Yeah. You're going from 5 to 10 employees to 15 to 150 to 1,500, but you're based out of sound financial and business and software practices that then scale appropriate. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't, as you grow, add more software. It's just, I think our first inkling is you go, oh, I need an accounting system. So we go to Google and we're hit with all these ads for everything. And they're like, oh yeah, I need this. Oh, that's a better HR system. I need that. Oh, look at this. I need that. And we're distracted by the shiny object versus understanding what are your requirements? What do you need the tool to do? What tool does that? And then making a sound business, advice. We're kind of flooded with ads and oftentimes distracted by a shiny object.
It's true. And when you're CEO founder, maybe you came from a development background, right? You're a coder and you came up with the next coolest, app. And then you start asking, oh, how do I commercialize it? And there's incubators out there and there's people who can help you and whatnot. But it's sorting through and finding the one who's been there and done it enough times to tell you, you don't want to do that. You really want to do this. And that's the real challenge, is finding, we specialize in SaaS for a reason. I'm not putting myself in front of manufacturing companies. I'm not doing service organizations. I'm primarily focused on software because we have we really know it well, and it's a niche, and there is a right way to do it. And, we pride ourselves on staying up on the current research and making sure that the tools that we're using. So we're doing that curation for our clients. We're saying, look, we're not going to come in and help you figure out how to do this. We're going to come in and tell you this is how you do it. And when you go in front of an investor, you're going to be presenting them with what they're expecting to see. I have this conversation a lot with first-time CEOs. No, your financial statements aren't going to help you as you scale. They just aren't. And you need to get them redesigned, and the sooner the better, because the later in the process, the more cleanup there is, because what you want to do, if you're going to come in and re-engineer a financial core, that's what we call it. The financial core is the accounting system, primarily the chart of accounts and financial reporting. It's the budgeting and forecasting tools, primarily the cash forecasting, and that's all the SaaS metrics, and that's a whole special creature in and of itself, right? So those three pieces are the financial core. We want to make sure that those are mirror images of each other, that they talk back and forth constantly, and that there's no duplication of error anywhere, and that it's set up in a way that when you go in front of an investor or your board or your executive team, you're all talking the same language, and you're talking the same language that everybody else in SaaS is talking, not some something that you made up because you saw it on some YouTube channel somewhere.
I love it.
Please do not do this at home, right? It's kind of one of those things like, look, you're great at developing software. Please go do that. You're great at selling. Please go do that. But when it comes to the stuff in the back office, please turn that over to professionals who know what they're doing and set it up right. And don't sit there and spend, this is the other thing. A lot of fractional CFOs out there, I'm sorry to call you all out on this because I'm from the inside and I know it, spend most of their time on accounting. Producing financial reports is an accounting function. So everything up to producing the financial reports, including the actual versus budget analysis, which is critical because you need to know how you're performing against your plan. That's all accounting. And it should be automated so that you can sit there with the financial statements when they're done and sit down in front of the CEO and say, look, gross margin's off. What's going on? Oh, well, we had a lot of, whatever. You dive into the details. Or our R&D spend seems low compared to others in our industry. Have we thought through whether we're actually putting enough resources into product roadmap? Or our CAC is way out of line. Why are we spending so much money on sales and marketing to get our customers? What on earth is going on here? Those are the kinds of discussions you should be having with your CFO, not, gee, well, our IT spend was 10% above budget this month. Well, that's because Carta renewed at the wrong, that's not what you need to be spending your time on.
I love it. Yeah, meaningful discussions. I want to highlight the SaaS Gurus website, which is SaaS-gurus.com, because if you're in that mode of starting your own SaaS company, right? There's a lot of really cool information that Anthony has out there. If you go under resources and go to his blog articles, you can sort by accounting and forecasting and metrics, and there's cool articles like just one that caught my how to build a unicorn startup 10x business plan, right? Should companies charge annually or monthly? So as you think through what's my model, right? I know we're talking back office kind of aspects, but there's information out there to help them with their actual business strategy from a CFO perspective.
Yeah, one of the ones that we come across a lot, and I have an article out there on that, is contracting. When you're out there, okay, a lot of companies in software will charge an implementation fee, an upfront project fee, some amount of fixed cost that's not software. And I go in there, and the first thing I do is I ask, can you get away from that? And they're like, well, why? We need the money. And it's like, I'm not saying to not do it. I said, it's how you do it. How you do it is, when you think about it, when you're a software company, a big part of your valuation is going to be a multiple of your ARR, right? So let's say you're looking at an ARR of 5 million, and you're in an industry where the typical multiples on that are, say, 10. So your company's worth 50 million on the recurring revenue. Do you know what the multiples are on services? Just off the top of your head?
No.
1, maybe 2. So if I have 50% of my revenue in services and 50% of my revenue in software, let's take that same $5 million example. I have $5 million in revenue this year. Half of it was implementation services and the other half was software. Great. I had a great year, right? $5 million. I did really well. I said, yeah, your company's worth 25 million on that. I said, but what happens if you took that 2.5 million of services revenue, figured out what your customer's life expectancy is, let's say it's 3 years or 5 years, and figured out if I kept my customer as I normally keep all my customers for 3 or 5 years, and I baked that services implementation into my recurring revenue, let's say I change that from 50-50, instead of 2.5 million in software and 2.5 million in services, I now make it 4 million in software and 1 million in services. Just by that simple change, your company's valuation went from 25 million to 40 million. Is that worth it to you?
Yeah.
I hope you'd say yes. So, and we do this a lot because there is this tendency of say, hey, I got to cover my costs up front. I got to get that in. I understand that. That is a cash issue. That is certainly part of the equation. But when it comes to time for investment in pre-money valuations and sales and whatnot, you're going to be looked at as a software company. And if you have a really high services, they're going to start discounting your value because you're not a software company, you're a services company, right? So that's an example of how you can really, from the beginning, when you're setting up your contracts and when you're looking at your business model, can I get this customer live without having to charge them a separate implementation fee, but charge them upfront for the first year of my software that has baked into it a factor that allows me to recover the costs of my delivery team and my support team that has to put them out there. That's the thinking you should be having as a CEO when it comes to pricing your SaaS contracts.
The analogy that I use when we talk to startups, and I go, what's one of the first positions you guys need to hire? And they go, sales. It's the first thing they say. And I go, okay. I go, you just won $1 billion in the lottery. What's the first thing you're going to do? And they're like, hire a financial advisor, right? It's the first thing people say. And I'm like, so if you want your company to grow to be of that value, why would you, the first thing you reach for is not a CFO, right? Someone to help you and guide you financially along the way. I get sales is important for growth, but I would challenge that first arrow being the sales guy to, I think you need you need a CFO to help guide you along the way from a financials perspective.
Where we add value to a company is really in 3 main areas. One is in just having the experience to answer all of the questions that you have, like about insurance or HR policies or whatnot. A good experienced CFO has had to deal with legal. They've had to deal with HR. They've had to deal with, IT selection. They've had to deal with security issues. They've had to deal with a range of things that are not finance. So a really good experienced CFO is going to be able to answer a lot of the quote unquote dumb questions that CEOs are asking themselves, like, who do I go to ask this? So that's why, that's the other thing too, is that by skipping and moving away from the accounting stuff, we can focus our CFOs on being CFOs and answering those kinds of questions for especially first timers. Now, somebody who's been a founder and has done it before and they're coming back, what they're looking for is somebody who gets SaaS. because they've already been through this ringer. They know what that gauntlet feels like, and they don't want to go through it again. They don't want to make that mistake of the first thing I hired was a salesperson. By the way, I'd hire marketing before I'd hire sales, just as an aside, because what's the salesperson going to sell if they don't have a steady stream of leads coming in to act on, right? So what's the point of, oh, and by the way, a marketing person will help you figure out your go-to-market strategy, which will help you figure out your segmentation and what your messaging should be and the channels that you should be using and the watering holes where they, oh, by the way, yeah, lead gen is pretty important. So, and if you have to make a choice between the finance guy and the marketing person, I'd have to say probably I'd give it off to the marketing person, because frankly, if you don't have sales, you can't do anything else, right?
So, there's nothing to book. Yeah.
There's nothing to book. But yeah, having an experienced, I have a few gray hairs here. If there's a recording going on, I earned them. I'm very proud of them. Because, some scar tissue and some gray hairs really counts in this industry. It's not like you're coming in as a finance person, straight out of, whatever MBA program and you're going to go conquer the world. No, there's a certain amount of, crap that you have to go through and experience to just really get it. And to say, I understand that's where you want to go with this, but it's probably better if you didn't do that. And here's some examples of where I've seen this go wrong. And I'll tell you, having examples to say, I've seen this movie before and here's how it ends. Maybe it won't end that way for you, but you might want to think about whether that's the script you want to follow. And, these are things that we build up over time. And it's something where it's, you really are paying for the right answer, not somebody to come in and figure out the right answer.
Awesome. Well, Anthony, it's been a pleasure. We haven't really talked about kind of fractional CFOs before on the show, especially for the founders and folks that are growing their company, right? Or maybe you're just in a growth mode and you're doing all this yourselves. Focus on what you're good at. I loved your analogy that you shared very early about, if you're a coder, great code, right? Build your product. Don't get caught up in all the back office stuff. That's not where your magic is needed. And I just love the offering that SaaS CEOs has in the space, the experience that you bring, all the information that you shared. I'm serious, if you haven't gone out and checked out the website while you're listening, just pull it out and go to resources. If you go to our culture, you'll see a really cool picture of Anthony out there. But if you go to resources, you really can see the blog posts and such, and you just share freely your information and your experience. And it's very cool. So thank you for being a guest on the show as well, and for what you do for folks that are, pursuing their hopes and dreams and starting their own companies.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.